One of the things that is common to us all is that we have all been hurt, wounded, or betrayed in a big way or small ways by people close to us, by maybe parents, maybe a family member, adult children, co-workers, someone we depended on, someone we trusted, someone we should have been able to trust. We've all had someone let down or disappoint us who chose to not follow through on a promise. For some of us, we have experienced abandonment, even abuse, and those things affect us more than we realize or we are willing to admit. And whether we recognize it or not, for many of us, we sort of walk through certain areas of life with a limp. As a result, it's affected the trajectory of our life. It's affected our sense of self-worth, our security, our ability or lack of ability to have a healthy, thriving, lasting relationship with others, our ability to maintain, to thrive in our jobs, how we relate to money, and for most of us, it's also even affected of how we view God. And what we've discovered over the past few weeks is to carry and to hold on to hurt. It chains us to the past, and in various ways, it hinders us, it holds us back, and it robs us from the kind of life that we truly long for. And what we've been discovering over the last few weeks is that one of the primary means that God uses us to help us break that chain with the past, is the gift of forgiveness. But we resist truly forgiving others because we feel like somehow we're giving the other person a gift, that somehow we're letting the offender off, that we're somehow doing them a favor, that we're letting them off the hook. But what we've been learning is that forgiveness is not primarily for the benefit of the offender, but for our benefit, for us. That forgiveness is about recognizing that something has been taken from us and identifying what it is that we feel that has been taken from us, and then deciding, you don't owe me anymore. I am choosing to cancel the debt. Forgiveness is deciding to cancel the debt. So if you missed either the last couple of weeks, you need to get online to listen. We've talked about anger, and the anger attached to the offenses that we've experienced or the hurt that we've experienced in the past, as well as the offenses and hurts that we may be experiencing in day-to-day life, in this season of life. Maybe it's people we live with, people we work with. It's just maybe we go to school with them. It's just people in our day-to-day lives. And how do we experience forgiveness at that level? And we've also looked at a passage of Scripture that sounds impossible, but we learned that we need to forgive. We need to forgive immediately, and we need to forgive completely. And that we can actually forgive people by faith even before they offend us. That we can wake up each morning, think about those individuals that we kind of know that we're going to encounter during the day, and something's going to happen. And it's, Lord, before I even get into that and experience that, I want to thank you for forgiving me ahead of time. And in light of how you've forgiven me, I'm forgiving them. And then when those encounters begin to realize, okay, I've actually dealt with that this morning. And now all this raises some important question marks and objections, and how do you do that? And I can't answer those in one or two sermons. You're trying to build a foundation to work towards something, to build from there. So today I want to touch on some of these kind of legitimate question marks. What does this look like? How does this actually play out in real life? And then next week, I want you to invite about 5 friends to come and sit with you as we discuss the person who is most often the hardest to forgive. And that's the person that we see in the mirror every day. But today I want to offer just some key insights into the process of forgiveness that I've discovered over my 5.5 decades of life, nearly 36 years of being a Jesus follower, 35 years of marriage, and 33 years of parenthood. And what I want desperately for every one of us, you and I, is to live a life where we truly thrive in our life and our relationships, because Jesus did not just come for heaven when we die. He came that we might experience a fullness of life in this life, no matter who hurts us, how they hurt us, how often they hurt us, or how bad they hurt us. And so the first insight is this, and it's going to sound almost nonsensical. It's that we don't need to wait until we're asked to forgive. And if you think about it, this is actually helpful. It's actually empowering. Because oftentimes, if we're honest, the person who has hurt us, they're never going to ask for forgiveness. In fact, there's a lot of times that honestly, they don't even know they need to ask for forgiveness. They don't understand the depth to which they have hurt us. And so likely they don't even know they need to ask. And if you and I continue to hold on to the anger, if you and I continue to hold on to this thing where we're waiting for them to come and ask us for forgiveness, well, who's really suffering? Them or us? We are. Because we're the one carrying this and holding on to this. So it's just critical. That's why it's critical for us to initiate forgiveness, not for the other person's sake, but for our sake. But then especially if the ultimate goal is to restore relationship. In the majority of situations, that should be or is the goal, not always. But if that is the case, then it's crucial for us to forgive, whether we're asked to or not, because forgiveness is the catalyst. It is the first step towards bringing two people back together or reconciling. And what we need to understand is that forgiveness is a decision. It's a decision that's not contingent upon the person who needs forgiveness recognizing that they need forgiveness. It's also not contingent on whether or not they ask for forgiveness. The power is in our hands, not theirs. So if you're someone who's waiting for whoever it is to come and ask you for forgiveness, you just need to know you don't need to wait on that any longer. You can decide to forgive them. It is in your power. And the best thing that you can do for you is to go ahead and forgive, as we talked about these past weeks. The second observation is that sometimes we benefit or we need a visual aid in the process. I shared in week 1 how some years ago that I was led through this process by just two gifted individuals through this process, this exercise of getting down on paper every single painful memory that I could recall to mind. And then the person or the people that were connected to that painful memory. And then once that task was completed, then it was a process of going with item 1 and then one by one going through, and then it was a series of prayers, a series of declarations in which it was, I forgive you. You don't owe me anymore. I am canceling your debt. And at times, I sat and I actually faced an empty chair, and I was instructed to visualize the person in that chair, because some of these people weren't even alive anymore. But a lot of them were, but to visualize that I was speaking to that person. Then at the end of the first week of the series, at the end of the message, we had a time where I encouraged anyone who was ready to take the step of forgiveness to visualize the person who had hurt you somehow, and I led us through a prayer, and I had you begin where you had a clenched fist, and you just imagine that thing you're holding on to, and at the end there was an invitation of going ahead and opening your fist as just kind of representing that you are releasing that, you're releasing that person. And so many of you responded to that, and I was just inspired by that. For some of you, maybe you need to get a picture, or maybe you need to get an object in front of you that represents that person. Or can be powerful, and I've known people that have done this. You write down or you type up every single incident or the incidents of hurt inflicted by another person. Again, they can be alive or dead, but write down as much as you want. You just pour it all out onto paper. And you type it onto a document, you print it up, whatever it is, and then you fold it up, and then you put that in, write that in, put that in an envelope, and then in big red letters, just write "canceled" across the front of the envelope. And then maybe you just stick that somewhere in your house where you know it is, so that in that moment when something brings up those emotions again, you can look at it and know, no, I have canceled that. Well, for some of you, what you need to do is you take that. And maybe for some of you, the hurt, the trauma is so big, you take that and maybe you burn it as a symbolic way of saying, those things have been canceled. They don't owe me anymore. I am canceling that debt. And again, maybe the hurt, the offense, it's just so big, it's so traumatic. Maybe you take some of that ash, you put it in a small vial or in a small container, and you put that somewhere in your home, and then when something triggers that memory or triggers that emotion, you look at that container of ash to remind yourself, no, I have canceled that. That's done. I have forgiven that debt. I am not chained to that anymore. They don't owe me. holding on to that. I'm not going to allow anger towards them to continue to control me anymore. And again, it can take any form that's meaningful to you as a visual reminder of the process, especially if you've been hurt deeply by someone, by an individual, maybe one time, maybe over time. But I recommend that you come up with some visual way to seal your decision. Seal your decision to forgive that person for your sake and to release them from that debt that you've been holding on to that, quite honestly, they will never be able to repay. Will they? I mean, there's just simply nothing that they can ever do that can replace what was taken from you. And in that process, it's important for you to recite or to write out or to type out specific incidents. And the reason this is important is because you and I are hurt, not generally. We are hurt incident by incident. It's not a general thing. It's a specific thing. It's a specific event. It was a specific word or specific words. It was a specific criticism. It was a specific offense. It was a specific betrayal. So for our ability to truly break free from specific hurts, we need to forgive specifically. And again, even if you've not yet embraced Jesus for who He said He was, you can do this. You can begin to pray, even if the idea of prayer is a little bit foreign to you, or if you're not sure if you're doing right. I'm just telling you, if you just simply get alone and say, okay, God, Chad said you'll hear me if I pray to you, so that's what I'm doing. And God, I don't want to keep having pain in my past, keep messing with my present and messing with my future. So please bring back to mind all those incidents. Everyone, even the ones that maybe I've forgotten about. But you know that they're there, they're under the surface, and I am confident that God will answer that prayer. And then one by one enable you to forgive and begin to help you find freedom and healing from every single one of those incidents or this series of incidents. The third insight is this, and it's related, that forgiveness is the first necessary step towards true emotional healing. And this is so important to understand, especially if you've been arguing with me and God as we've had conversation about this, because it's so big in your mind. Because especially when you are hurt emotionally, it can be compared to being hurt physically. So for example, like a year and a half ago, working with a chainsaw, back tree line. Let's say I'm working with a chainsaw, and at some point the chain snags and it jumps, or I'm not paying attention to the chain, and I just cut a huge gash in my leg. How am I going to react? Well, the first is I don't want anybody touching it. Okay, so I'm going to be a little defensive. And the second thing is I would be very sensitive about it, about my leg. And the third thing is I'm going to be very self-centered, because hurt and pain makes our world constrict and become very small and very self-focused and me-focused. Right now, me and my wound, we are priority. I mean, have you ever noticed that the more you're hurt, the more self-centered you become? I mean, if you haven't noticed it in yourself, you have noticed it in other people. In fact, you've had people in your life that you're tempted to avoid. You see them coming, it's like, I'm going the other way. You've had some people pop up on your caller ID and go like, I'm letting it go to voicemail. Why? Because you knew the moment that you answered, within the first 15 seconds, they were going to dominate any conversation about that thing or that circumstance or that person that is causing them frustration or pain, right? If after service, I were to be hit by a car in the parking lot and taken down and my arm is broken, that is not going to be the time while I'm laying there on the ground to walk up and ask me for an appointment to talk about some things. Like I'm lying on the concrete in pain. I'm interested in one thing. Chad, not you, not your problem. Because when you're hurt, you get naturally very defensive and sensitive and self-centered. It's just the nature of pain. And when you've been wounded, you become self-centered by nature. That's just part of being wounded. And just as there is no doctor or method or medicine that can instantaneously heal my physical wound, there are some things that a doctor could do to begin the healing process. But the problem is, to begin the healing process, sometimes the thing the doctor needs to do or the nurse needs to do hurts more than the wound itself originally did. It's like, okay, doctor, I need you to fix it, but don't touch it. Don't touch it because it hurts. Well, I've got to touch it to fix it. No, don't touch it, because when you touch it, it hurts. It hurts worse, so don't touch it. Just like fix it from over there, okay? Like, remember when you were a kid and you get hurt? You know, maybe you fell and skinned your knee or your elbow, your hand is like dirty, it's like bleeding, and you run in you're to your mom or your dad and you're crying like mommy, daddy, it hurts, and look at this, and then they make a move towards it, and what do? You like jerk away, like, no, don't touch it. It hurts. But honey, mommy has to so I can fix it. No. Well, why? Because it'll hurt. But it has to hurt first before it can get better. And sometimes the process of forgiveness, forgiveness seems to intensify the pain. So consequently, people draw back from this whole idea. Because recalling and remembering and dwelling and processing and remembering those incidences that caused the pain, it's like, no, I just don't want to deal with it. It's too painful. Don't touch it. But just like getting your wound cleaned or having a bone reset or having a surgery often causes more pain than the original problem, those are the very things that are necessary to begin the physical healing process. And in the same way, forgiveness is the beginning of the emotional healing process. To refuse to forgive is to cause the pain to go on and on and on and ultimately get worse. And ultimately, you continue to hurt yourself. And the fact is, time does not heal all wounds. You can have some physical wounds that time will make them worse without a physician's immediate attention. The same is true with emotional wounds. And forgiveness is God's loving way of beginning the emotional, the relational healing process. It's not the entire process, but it's the first step. And as painful as it may be, as much as you may want to pull away or withdraw or pretend that you're not hurt or you don't want to let anyone close to it or know about it or see it or deal with it, at some point you need to face your pain and face your hurt, and you need to forgive. And if you do, God will begin the healing process in your life. And the fourth insight you'll be glad to hear. Forgiveness does not mean acting as if nothing ever happened. I know for many people, this misconception is part of the reason that they refuse or they hesitate to forgive. But forgiveness does not equal forgetting. And it does not equal pretending like nothing ever happened. God does not expect you to pretend like nothing ever happened. In fact, it's unhealthy to pretend that like nothing ever happened. There is a time to confront. There is a time to sit a person down and say, hey, we need to talk. We need to talk about this. Forgiveness does not equal ignore the problem. There is a time for confrontation. But here's the key. If you're a Jesus follower, God would say, I'm not asking you to ignore situations, but I am asking you to forgive first and confront later. Years ago, our son Jake, he was in middle school. He came home very upset. And you need to understand, Jake was kind of the Tigger of the family. He just made us laugh. He was tender-hearted. He was compassionate. He was loyal. He was easy to like, easy to love. And on this day, he was just in tears. And as he explained the details, it was his teacher had really gone overboard in calling him out in front of the whole class for something that, in fact, I can't remember if he didn't actually do it or was like, he did something this level and the reaction was this level. But whatever it was, he felt embarrassed. He felt humiliated. And again, to clarify something, you need to know I'm a Gen X parent. I was not a helicopter parent. I wasn't a bulldozer parent, just like, oh, you fell, just don't bleed on the carpet. If the teacher calls, says, hey, your child did something, I am backing the teacher. So the hammer comes down at school. The hammer is coming down at home too. That's the way we were. But I will say on this occasion, like there was no question. There was no question the teacher had been way out of line and almost came across as a bully in this situation. And as a dad, you don't get to bully my kids. So I immediately called the school. I arranged to meet with the teacher first thing the next morning before class started, and I was hot, okay? I mean, you mess with my wife and children. If Jesus weren't in the picture, my natural reaction is to go to scorched earth, like I defend my family. But the next morning, I was driving to school, and I just started praying about this meeting. And as I prayed, I felt a huge shift in my heart. And I felt a complete reversal in my heart towards this teacher who had hurt my kid, which quite honestly was kind of irritating. I wanted to stay mad. I felt justified. But I sensed this change, and I sensed in my gut there's more to this situation, and I forgave her before I actually arrived at the school. And I knew in my heart that the moment I sat down in front of her that there was a question I needed to ask her. So I parked, I went in the building, I walked into the classroom where the teacher was. She had set up 2 chairs facing each other by her desk. She was clearly nervous. And we sat down across from one another, and I just took a breath, and I looked her in her eyes, and I said, before we start, if you don't mind, I just want to ask, how are you? How are you doing, really? And she just stared back at me in shock. And then she just broke down crying. And tears just started flowing down her face. She began to tell me how awful she had felt for how she had been towards Jake. And she said it's no excuse, but the night before, 2 significant things had happened in her personal life. It was her husband found out he was being laid off from his job immediately. And then just a few hours later, she found out she was pregnant. She was just so overwhelmed. She had no idea what they were going to do. Now, imagine how different that conversation could have gone if I had still been holding on to the anger. What an opportunity that would have been lost. Imagine how by essentially forgiving a person in the wrong who had hurt someone I loved ahead of time, allowed God to then use this situation to not only heal things between her and my son, which she did, where later on in the day, she apologized to him and acknowledged the whole class like she had lost her temper and gone overboard and asked him to forgive her in front of the whole class. But it also provided her, as an unchurched person, by the way, her and her husband, a powerful moment where she was given a moment to just pour out her fears and her frustration and her concern and her anxiety, because I came in with compassion instead of anger, even though I would have been fully justified to come in anger. And as a result, the cool thing, how God used it, it opened the door for me to network her husband with some of the other individuals in our church, some who were business owners and leaders, to very quickly find him another job. And yet none of that would have happened if I would have just come and entered into the conversation, rightly so, with anger, and you owe me, and you owe my son. As we learned from the Apostle Paul 2 weeks ago, be angry. That's okay. But don't sin. And when you and I hold on to anger any longer than we have to, it just increases the possibility that we're going to say something, we're going to do something, we're going to decide something that we're going to regret. And then on top of that, the huge opportunities that we are going to miss of what God might have done if we had been willing to forgive ahead of time. There is a time to confront, but before you confront, you need to forgive, knowing that forgiveness doesn't mean acting as if nothing ever happened. And if you've been hurt or wounded deeply by a person, it may be just one event, it may be a series of events, they may not even know that they're doing it, but it's how they treat us, how they speak to us, they just hurt us. But if any of that is the case with you, here's what I would suggest. The first is that you need to establish some boundaries. For starters, you need to establish some relational boundaries. A boundary is just simply something that determines who gets in and how close they get. I mean, all of you have a door on your house or your apartment. And the reason you have a door is because you want to control who gets in. And there are some people you don't want in. There are some people you want to stay on the front step. There are some people you don't even want at your front step. Nope. But you don't want them in. You want to control who gets in your house and when. In the same way, for your healing process to work, to continue, to go the distance, you and I must decide to set up some boundaries. Who gets in and how close they get. Otherwise, emotional wounds are never allowed to heal. You need to set boundaries. And you do this all the time. But you just don't necessarily think of it in terms of hurt and forgiveness. I mean, if you're a parent, if you're raising kids, or you've raised kids, like you tell your children, like be kind and compassionate and nice to everyone, but don't invite everyone into your inner circle of friends. Like, again, it's when they start getting into middle school and high school, there are some people like, I know you have to go to class with them. You do not need to interact with them in any other way beyond that, okay? Because you just see that you're trying to help them establish boundaries. So you do this all the time. If you're married, hopefully you set some boundaries in how you interact or you relate with members of the opposite sex or people you find attractive. There are certain things that you shouldn't talk with them about as it pertains to your marriage or your life. That's a boundary. There are certain situations that you shouldn't allow yourself to get into with them. That's a boundary. There's a certain amount of time you should limit with them. Those are boundaries. Again, we're all accustomed to doing this. And when you've been hurt by someone, you need to establish boundaries in the relationship to give yourself some margin, some space, some time so that you can heal. It might only be a few hours, it might be days, it might be weeks, it might be months. But God does not expect you to just rush back into a relationship as if nothing ever happened, because that reverses the healing process. And you might say, well, Chad, that sounds like a little contradictory, like I'm supposed to just forgive, and that sounds like walls. I thought forgiving was about tearing down walls so I could have a relationship. Here's the difference. A wall is created to punish. A wall is created through an unforgiving spirit. And when I have resentment in my heart, the goal of a wall is revenge. I'm not going to have a relationship with you until you get your act together. I'm not going to have a relationship with you until you come and ask me for forgiveness. But the boundaries we're talking about that are established through forgiveness, through wisdom, the goal of boundaries is to keep the person just far enough away so that I can have a level of a relationship that I can handle, but that ultimately moves towards restoration and reconciliation over time. I need to decide just how close we can be so that maybe we can at least talk about some things, that we're at least able to do some things, but you may need to set up some boundaries, and specifically in 3 areas. The first is you need to have activity boundaries, that there are just certain things that we can't do together. Maybe there was a time we did do those or we felt like we could, but we can't do that anymore. We can't be involved in that. The second is you need to establish some communication boundaries. They said, I need us to not talk about that for right now. Not forever, but just not right now. I want to get to the place where I can, but I'm not now. I need some space to process. And then you need some time boundaries. That there are some people who have hurt you, and you just need to not spend a lot of time with them, or spend less time with them, or maybe for a season, no time at all. And you know what? That's okay. So you need to set up some boundaries. Again, not for the goal of never having a relationship, though again, there are some situations like that's just not an option. But in most cases it is. But of establishing a safety zone so that you can begin to move back into relationship with the people who have hurt you. That's the only way for there to be healing. Very recently, I was closely involved in the process with someone very close to Shauna and I. And because of very deep hurt caused by her father and some ongoing patterns of behavior, she was kind of graduate school age, she finally felt she had no choice but to establish some very, very strict relational activity, communication, and time boundaries with her dad. It's like, listen, like don't message me, don't even send me a birthday card, just I need some space. And it took about 4 years, partly because at first he just refused to respect those boundaries. And every time he did, it just took him back to zero, sometimes a little farther back. But he finally got to where he would respect those boundaries. I kind of became a sounding board where he could just process and stop trying to reach out to her. If you need to reach out, you text me, you call me. But he finally did that, and it gave her time to heal, and it began to slowly open the door to reestablishing relationship, to where now, fast forward, just about 1.5 to 2 years ago, it finally got to where he was invited to come and visit their home, which is out of state, and even come stay with them and begin to get to know his grandchild. And here's the beautiful thing. Especially for those of you for whom your motivator is because you recognize the magnitude of God's love for you and His forgiveness, is that when you begin to take these steps, your Heavenly Father, as you take these steps of trust, and they are steps of trust, as you take these steps, God will honor that. And as you heal, you'll see God begin to change you. God will help you rebuild your self-esteem. He will create healing. The goal would be that as time progresses, especially as the other person respects your boundaries, that you would sort of be able to adjust those boundaries to where you're able to let them in a little bit more and a little bit more. And over time, and I've seen this before, you may come to the place where you can remove all the boundaries, to where you can finally talk about anything, go anywhere, spend as much time around them as you want, and those wounds are not reopened. But right after you forgive someone, you need to set some boundaries so that you can heal, so that there can be some relationship, but a level that you can handle. Now I need to flip this for the other category. For some, you're the source of pain. You're the source of wounds. You're the source of hurt for someone else. If they were in this situation and I had asked like a few weeks ago, like think of that person that's hurt you, that your face would come to mind. Maybe a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, a parent, an employee, an employer. The first and the best thing that you could do is own it if you haven't already. Own it, and own it as soon as possible. And don't rationalize, don't excuse, don't justify your hurtful words, your hurtful actions. Don't blame it on how you're raised or the bad home you grew up in or your temperament. You were wrong. You caused pain. You caused hurt, whether you intended to or not. So you own it. I was wrong. I am so sorry. And then shut up. The second wisest thing you can do is to respect their boundaries. You get it all out there and they say, thank you. Like, I received that. I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I need to process. Don't press it. Don't press the issue and say, well, come on, but I thought you're forgiving me. I just don't know if I can go that long. We need to talk about this. But they begin to sort of let you know, like, I kind of need some space. I need to process. I've set some boundaries. Don't be insensitive and plow through those boundaries. And don't ever throw forgiveness in their face. Well, I thought you forgave me. They may have forgiven you, but they need time to heal. And the best thing that you can do for them and for your relationship and for the relationship to heal at its quickest pace is to respect the healing process for the injuries that you caused. To say, if that's what you need, if that's the time that you need, if that's the space you need, if we need to stay off that subject, okay, I will do that. I will respect those boundaries. And in doing so, you show love and you participate in the healing of the relationship. And I speak from experience. Everything that I've talked about, I've lived. Within the first 10 years of our relationship, there are 3 specific incidents that stand out in my mind where my stupidity, my immaturity, my selfishness led me to hurt Shauna deeply. And in those situations, I acknowledged it with 0 excuses or qualifications, and with shocking speed, she forgave me because that's just who she is. But especially as a processor, she knew if she was going to heal, she needed everything I just listed: time, activity, communication boundaries, to work towards healing the wounds that I had caused. And by God's grace, He enabled me to embrace how I had hurt her, that she owed me nothing. Which meant I could not allow my fix things as quickly as possible, especially as a man. Got to fix a problem. I couldn't let that take over. Instead, to allow her to set the pace, to respect any boundary that she set, to give her space to heal. Because the bottom line was, I loved her. And the fact that she was willing to forgive me made me love her more. And by respecting her pace and boundaries, it allowed God to work. It allowed God to heal. He drew us even closer together over time as He renewed both of our minds and transformed both of our hearts. And the last observation is that forgiveness allows us to see our own faults and offenses. See, until you forgive, you are blameless in your own mind, and so am I. The fact is, as I said, there are people out there who, when they think of someone that hurt them, your face comes to mind. My face comes to mind. The person who you feel hurt by, they may be on the other side of it where they feel hurt by you. So when we're angry, when we've been hurt, we're blameless in our eyes. And then if somebody points a finger at us, we will go, no, 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 no. My offense was this level. Theirs was here. I've got a case a mile long. We're innocent. We're the victim. And it's amazing what happens on the inside of us once we decide to forgive. Because then we begin to see our own attitudes. How in many situations where the truth is we contributed. And even how we responded maybe in a wrong way to what was done for us. Like we were wronged at this level, we responded at this level. And we need to own that. Maybe we were part of the problem. We need to own that. And as we said, if you're a Christian, at the cross, all of us lost our right and excuse to withhold forgiveness. At the cross, where you and I were forgiven for a list that goes on and on and on of all of the wrongs that we had accomplished. You and I who have also hurt others, all of us lost our right to hold on to anger towards someone, to hold on to that debt. So the question before we leave or before you log off today is, are you still holding on? In a small way or a big way? And again, I know if we were sitting talking over food or whatever, you were explaining it to me, you have every good reason to be mad, every good reason to hold on to it. But the issue is, if you're a follower of Christ, are you still hanging on? Again, especially if you're someone who takes your faith in God seriously, it's time. It's time to let it go. It's time to say, as much as I don't want to do this, as much as I want to see them suffer, I can't deny it. I have lost my right to refuse to forgive. And the fact is, to refuse to forgive is only hurting myself, which is then causing me to hurt other people I love. And I don't want to do that anymore. And as speaking as someone that within my life and the lives of my immediate and extended family, there has been hurt and wounds caused by betrayal, affairs, divorces, verbal abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, sexual assault. I know firsthand within my life and the lives of those closest to me what it is to face the seemingly unforgivable. For some of you, and for sure people you know and love, it's time. For some, maybe it's time to engage counseling to help guide the process. Because again, forgiveness isn't the whole process, but it initiates it. It is the catalyst to begin the healing in you and the relationships that need to be healed. This is what our Heavenly Father wants for us and from us. And as difficult and as unjustified as it may seem, the Lord Jesus Christ says, you and I must forgive from the heart. That we are to extend to others the same mercy and grace that was extended to us at the cross. And when we forgive, then we benefit, because when we forgive, we're the ones that are set free. Please don't miss next week. Next week may be one of the most important messages in the series as we wrap up learning how to forgive the hardest person to forgive. Let me pray for us. Father, I don't take anything I've said lightly. You know my heart, my mind, my history, my present, my future. And Father, I just pray for all of us. First, I thank you for those that have experienced this healing and this freedom that we learn from your word, that we learn from you. But for those, Father, of us that we've buried it, we've pushed it down, and we think we've just left it behind, but the truth is it's still there. We're still holding on to it. Or something comes up and the emotions get stirred up in us fresh. I pray, God, that your Spirit would enable us to finally open our hands and release that. For those of us, Father, that we hate confrontation. We feel like it's just easier to just carry it. I pray for the courage. I pray that you would provide courage and words of wisdom, even compassion. The courage to go ahead and initiate a conversation that is long overdue. so that there might be freedom and perhaps reconciliation and healing. God, thank you for the example of your love through your Son. On the one hand, it's so offensive, but on the other hand, we're so grateful because it's what saves us and gives us hope. So, Father, lead us in this. I pray that you would create some unbelievable healing beyond anything we could ask or imagine. I pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.